The desert sun was already merciless at 0600 as Harper McKenna made her way across the training compound at forward operating base sentinel. Her medical pack bounced rhythmically against her back, filled with everything needed to keep soldiers breathing when the world went sideways. The morning air carried the familiar sounds of military life, helicopters warming up, sergeants barking orders, and the distant crack of rifle fire from the range. Harper had been at Sentinel for 3 months now, serving as the primary combat medic for what was supposed to be a routine deployment. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough trauma to know that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her auburn hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her green eyes held the kind of focus that came from years of making life-or-death decisions in seconds. The other medics respected her. The infantry guys appreciated her skill. But there was one group that seemed determined to remind her daily that she didn't belong in there. World Chief Jake Morrison and his 5-man SEAL sniper team. Jake Morrison was everything Hollywood imagined when they cast Navy SEALs. 6'2", built like a linebacker, with the kind of swagger that came from years of being told he was elite. His team treated him like a god, and he seemed to enjoy the worship. They had arrived at Sentinel 2 weeks ago, and from day one, Jake had made it clear that he viewed combat medics as necessary baggage rather than essential personnel. "Morning, Doc," Jake called out as Harper passed the long-range shooting area. His voice carried that particular tone the military personnel perfected, technically respectful, but dripping with condescension. "Hope you're not planning to get in the way of real training today." Harper paused, adjusting her grip on her medical kit. This was how it always started. The small comments, the casual dismissals, the constant reminders that she was an outsider in their world of precision shooting and tactical operations. "Just doing my job, Chief," Harper replied evenly. She had learned early in her military career that rising to bait only gave bullies more ammunition. Jake's team, Rodriguez, Stevens, Mason, Webb, and Johnson, were setting up their equipment for another day of what they called reaching out and touching someone. The centerpiece of their arsenal was a massive Barrett .50 caliber rifle, a weapon so powerful it could disable vehicles from over a mile away. The sight of it always made Harper's chest tighten, though she couldn't quite explain why. "Your job," Jake said, walking over with his characteristic swagger, "is to patch people up after real warriors do the hard work. Maybe stick to that instead of wandering around where serious operators are training." The comment stung more than Harper cared to admit. She had been treating wounded soldiers since her deployment began, had saved lives under fire, and earned the respect of every unit she'd worked with. Every unit except this one. "I'll stay out of your way," Harper said, but something in her voice must have betrayed her frustration because Jake's grin widened. "Problem, Doc? You look like you want to say something." Harper felt the weight of 6 pairs of eyes on her. The smart move was to walk away, to avoid escalating a situation that could only end badly for her. But something about Jake's smug expression, about the way his team snickered like schoolyard bullies, made her spine straighten. "No problem at all," she said. "I'm just wondering if all that expensive training taught you anything about respect for fellow service members." The snickering stopped. Jake's expression shifted from amused to something darker. "Respect is earned, Doc, and last time I checked, carrying a first aid kit doesn't qualify you to lecture operators about warfare." He gestured to the Barrett rifle. "This is what earns respect. The ability to reach out 1,800 meters and end a threat before it knows you exist. Can your medical bag do that?" Harper looked at the massive rifle, its scope gleaming in the morning sun. For just a moment, her fingers twitched in a way that would have been imperceptible to most observers. But Rodriguez, the team's senior enlisted man, noticed. His expression shifted slightly, as if recognizing something he couldn't quite place. "Medical training saves lives," Harper said quietly. "I think that would earn some respect." Jake laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Saving lives is admirable, Doc, but this is a combat zone. Sometimes the best way to save lives is to eliminate the threats trying to take them. That requires skills you don't have and training you've never received." The assumption hung in the air like smoke from gunfire. Harper felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear, but something closer to sadness. Jake Morrison had no idea who he was talking to. No idea what she had done before trading her rifle for a medical bag. And she intended to keep it that way. "You're right," Harper said finally. "I should focus on my job." She walked away, leaving Jake's team to their preparations. Behind her, she could hear them laughing, making jokes about playing with the big boys and staying in your lane. The words followed her across the compound, each one a small cut that she filed away for later consideration. But as Harper reached her aid station, she couldn't shake the image of that Barrett rifle. The weight of it, the feel of the trigger, the way the scope settled naturally against her eye. These were memories she had worked hard to bury. Memories of a different life, when she had been the one behind the scope instead of the one patching up the aftermath. Her hands were steady as she organized her medical supplies, arranging them according to the protocols that had become second nature. Massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation, hypothermia. Each item had its place, its purpose, its moment when it could mean the difference between life and death. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jake Morrison and his team spent their days practicing to take lives from impossible distances, convinced that their precision shooting made them the ultimate warriors. But Harper knew something they didn't, that the hardest shot to make wasn't the one that killed, but the one that allowed healing to begin. She pulled out her duty roster, checking the training schedule for the day. Jake's team would be on the range for the next 6 hours, practicing their long-distance shooting. She would be conducting medical training for a group of infantry soldiers, teaching them how to save each other when the shooting stopped and the bleeding began. Two different missions, two different skill sets, two different definitions of what it meant to be a warrior. But as Harper prepared for her training session, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if those worlds ever collided. If circumstances ever forced her to choose between the rifle and the medical bag. If Jake Morrison ever discovered that the simple medic he dismissed so casually had once been something very different. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the desert wind. Over the next week, Jake Morrison's comments evolved from casual dismissal to something more pointed. It started small, walking past Harper during meals and making loud comments about real soldiers versus support personnel. His team would laugh on cue, their voices carrying just far enough to ensure Harper heard every word. "I heard Doc McKenna thinks she understands tactics," Stevens said one morning, his voice pitched perfectly to carry across the mess hall. "Next thing you know, she'd be telling us how to clear buildings." Harper kept her eyes on her breakfast, mechanically eating eggs that had lost all taste. Around her, conversations had grown quieter as other personnel picked up on the tension. She could feel sympathetic glances from some of the infantry soldiers she'd trained, but no one spoke up. Jake Morrison was a SEAL chief with combat decorations and connections. Harper was just a medic. The breaking point should have been the incident with Private Coleman. Harper was conducting trauma training behind the medical facility when Coleman collapsed during the exercise. Heat exhaustion in the desert was common, but this was different. The young soldier's pulse was racing, his skin was clammy, and his pupils were dilated in a way that suggested something beyond simple dehydration. "Get him into the shade," Harper ordered, already reaching for her kit. Someone grabbed my cooling vest from inside. She had Coleman stabilized within minutes. his vital signs improving as she worked through the protocol for a heat-related illness. It was textbook medical response, the kind of life-saving intervention that reminded everyone why combat medics were essential. That's when Jake Morrison appeared. "What's all the commotion, Doc?" he asked, surveying the scene with theatrical concern. "Little training exercise too intense for your students?" Harper looked up from where she was monitoring Coleman's pulse. Private Coleman experienced heat exhaustion. "He's stable now, but I'm recommending he be held from training for the rest of the day." Jake crouched down next to Coleman, who was now sitting up and looking embarrassed. "Heat exhaustion, huh? In my day, we called that Tuesday." He clapped Coleman on the shoulder with enough force to make the young soldier wince. "What do you think, soldier? Ready to get back to real training? Or do you need Doc here to hold your hand a little longer?" Coleman looked between Harper and Jake, the conflict clear on his face. Harper recognized the position he was in, caught between medical advice and the pressure to appear tough in front of a decorated SEAL. "I feel better, Chief," Coleman said quietly. "Maybe I could—" "Negative," Harper interrupted. "Heat exhaustion can progress to heat stroke without warning. Private Coleman needs hydration and rest." Jake's smile was sharp. "With respect, Doc, I think a combat soldier can make his own decisions about his fitness. We're not running a daycare here." The comment sent a murmur through the gathered soldiers. Harper felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice professional. "Chief Morrison, medical decisions aren't made by committee. Private Coleman is under my care." "Your care," Jake repeated, standing slowly. "Tell me, Doc, when was the last time you made a decision that actually mattered? When lives were really on the line?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harper's hand stilled on Coleman's wrist as memories she'd worked hard to suppress came flooding back. A ridge in Afghanistan, a spotter bleeding out, a choice between taking a shot and providing medical care. The moment everything changed. But Jake Morrison didn't know about any of that. To him, she was just a medic who had never faced real combat, never made decisions where seconds meant the difference between life and death. "Every medical decision matters," Harper said finally. "Every life matters." Jake's laugh was dismissive, spoken like someone who's never had to prioritize. "In real combat, Doc, sometimes you have to choose who lives and who dies. Sometimes you have to make the hard call to save the many instead of the few. That requires experience you don't have." Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward. There was something in his expression that Harper couldn't read. Recognition, maybe, or warning. "Chief Morrison," Rodriguez said carefully, "Doc McKenna's medical training is adequate for treating scraped knees and hurt feelings," Jake finished. "But let's not pretend it's the same as real combat experience." Coleman struggled to his feet, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of the confrontation. "I feel fine, really. Maybe I could just—" "Sit down, Private," Harper ordered, a voice carrying a tone of command that surprised everyone present. For just a moment, she sounded less like a medic and more like someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The authority in her voice made Jake pause. His eyes narrowed as he studied Harper more carefully, as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "Interesting," he said slowly. "Where exactly did you learn to give orders like that, Doc?" Harper realized her mistake immediately. The command voice was a holdover from her previous life, when she had been the one making tactical decisions and leading fire teams. She forced herself to relax, to slip back into the role of the quiet medic. "Military bearing is part of every soldier's training," she said, medical or otherwise. Jake wasn't buying it. He circled her slowly, like a predator sensing weakness in its prey. "Military bearing, right. Tell me, Doc, what was your most before you became a medic?" The question was casual, but Harper could hear the trap beneath it. Jake Morrison wasn't just a bully. He was intelligent, observant, and now suspicious. She needed to deflect without lying outright. "I've always been a medic," she said, which was technically true. She had been a medic for 3 years now. "Always," Jake repeated. "Interesting career path. Most soldiers I know who go straight into medical have, let's call them, different motivations for serving." The implication was clear. Jake was suggesting that Harper had chosen medical training because she lacked the courage for combat roles. It was a calculated insult designed to provoke a reaction. Harper felt something cold and dangerous stir in her chest. For just a moment, she was tempted to show Jake Morrison exactly what kind of soldier she had been before medical school, to demonstrate that the quiet medic he was mocking had once been one of the most feared marksmen in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Instead, she turned back to Coleman. "Private, you're done for the day. Report to the aid station in 4 hours for a follow-up assessment." Jake watched her work with new interest. There was something about her movements, her confidence, the way she handled herself under pressure, that didn't match his preconceptions about support personnel. "You know what, Doc?" he said finally. "Maybe you're right. Medical training probably does teach valuable skills. Different from combat training, but valuable." Harper looked up, surprised by the apparent concession. "In fact," Jake continued, his smile returning, "I think my team could benefit from some medical training. Why don't you come by the range tomorrow? Show us how a real medic works under pressure." It sounded like an offer, but Harper could hear the challenge beneath it. Jake Morrison was planning something, and she was going to be the target. "I'd be happy to provide medical training to your team," she said carefully. "Excellent. We'll be conducting some precision shooting exercises. Nothing you can't handle, I'm sure." Jake's grin was predatory. "After all, like you said, every soldier matters." As Jake and his team walked away, Rodriguez lingered. He waited until they were out of earshot before approaching Harper. "Be careful tomorrow," he said quietly. "Chief Morrison doesn't like being challenged, and he's got a mean streak when his authority is questioned." Harper finished packing her medical kit. "I can handle Chief Morrison." Rodriguez studied her face, and again, Harper had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "Maybe you can," he said finally. "But Harper, whatever you were before you became a medic, whatever skills you're hiding, be very careful about revealing them. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again." The warning sent a chill down Harper's spine because Rodriguez was right. She had spent 3 years building a new identity, becoming someone whose hands healed instead of killed. Tomorrow, Jake Morrison was going to push her in ways that might force that old self to surface, and Harper wasn't sure she was strong enough to keep it buried. The next morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made the desert feel like a living thing trying to kill you. Harper approached the rifle range with her medical kit and a growing sense of unease. She had barely slept, her dreams filled with memories she had worked hard to suppress. The weight of a rifle scope against her eye, the mathematical precision of calculating wind drift and bullet drop, the moment when everything went still and the only thing that existed was the target and the trigger. Morrison's team was already set up when she arrived. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle sat on its bipod like a sleeping predator, its massive bulk dwarfing every other weapon on the range. Around it, the SEALs were conducting equipment checks with the kind of casual expertise that came from years of training. "Morning, Doc," Jake called out cheerfully. "Ready for some real education?" Harper noticed immediately that something was different about the setup. Usually, training exercises had clear objectives and safety protocols. Today felt more like a stage being set for a performance. "What kind of medical training did you have in mind?" Harper asked, setting down her kit in the shade of a supply truck. Jake's smile was all teeth. "Well, we thought we'd start with something Simple. Trauma care under stress. Simulate real combat conditions. He gestured to a series of targets set up at various distances. We'll be engaging targets from 400 to 1200 meters. Your job is to provide medical support if anyone gets hurt. Simple enough for support personnel, right? Harper felt the first stirring of real anger. Jake was treating her like a prop in his demonstration, a way to show off in front of his team while reinforcing her place in the military hierarchy. "Chief Morrison," she said carefully, "if this is a training exercise, it should have specific learning objectives and safety protocols. What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" Jake's expression hardened slightly. "What I'm trying to accomplish, Doc, is showing my team what real precision shooting looks like. What you're here for is to watch and learn. Maybe gain some appreciation for what actual warriors do." Rodriguez caught Harper's eye and shook his head slightly, a warning to back down. But Harper had spent too many years being dismissed, too many months listening to Jake's casual cruelty toward anyone he perceived as beneath him. "I understand precision shooting," Harper said quietly. "I've seen its effects." "Seen its effects," Jake repeated mockingly. "Right, in the aid station after real soldiers do the hard work. That's not the same as understanding, Doc. Understanding requires experience." He picked up the Barrett with practiced ease, settling behind it with the kind of fluid motion that spoke of thousands of repetitions. This weapon can reach out and touch someone at over 1,800 meters. The skill required to make shots at that range, to compensate for wind, temperature, humidity, the Coriolis effect. That's something you learn through years of training, not by reading about it in a medical textbook. Harper watched him prepare for his shot, noting automatically the way he positioned his body, the rhythm of his breathing, the minute adjustments he made to the scope. Everything was textbook perfect, exactly what she would expect from an elite. "Sniper!" The Barrett roared, its voice echoing across the desert like thunder. 1,200 meters away, the target shuddered as the massive bullet found its mark. "Center hit," Stevens called out from behind a spotting scope. "Nice shooting, Chief." Jake's team erupted in congratulations, slapping him on the back and making jokes about reaching out and ruining someone's day. The display was clearly intended to impress Harper, to reinforce the gap between their world and hers. "Your turn, Stevens," Jake announced. "Let's see if you can match that." One by one, Jake's team took turns behind the Barrett. Each shot was accompanied by commentary designed to emphasize the technical difficulty of long-range shooting, the years of training required, the elite nature of their skills. And through it all, Jake kept glancing at Harper, watching for signs of intimidation or awe, but Harper wasn't intimidated. If anything, watching the demonstration was bringing back memories she had tried to suppress. Muscle memory was stirring, calculations running through her mind automatically. Wind speed from the southwest at 8 knots, density altitude approximately 3,000 feet, target distance confirmed at 1,200 meters. "What do you think, Doc?" Jake asked when the last of his team had shot. "Impressive display of real soldiering?" Harper looked at the Barrett, then at the targets in the distance. Something reckless was building in her chest, a dangerous urge to show Jake Morrison exactly how wrong he was about her capabilities. "It's good shooting," she said carefully. "Very technical." Jake's grin widened. "Technical, right. I suppose from your perspective, it all looks like magic. Point, shoot, target falls down." He gestured dismissively. "The reality is that each of those shots required complex calculations, years of training, and natural talent that not everyone possesses." "The reality," Harper said quietly, "is that long-range shooting is applied mathematics combined with proper fundamentals. Wind reading, ballistic coefficients, atmospheric effects. They're measurable, predictable variables. The casual expertise in her voice made Jake pause. His expression shifted from amusement to suspicion. Measurable and predictable, he repeated slowly. You sound like you know something about it, Doc. Where exactly did you pick up this expertise in ballistics? Harper realized she had said too much. The old self was bleeding through. The part of her that had once been among the best marksmen in the military. She needed to deflect, to step back into her role as the quiet medic. I've treated enough gunshot wounds to understand the physics involved, she said. But Jake wasn't buying it anymore. He was studying her with new intensity, as if seeing her for the first time. Physics, he said. Right, tell me, Doc, what's the ballistic coefficient of a 750 grain 50 BMG round? The question was a test, designed to expose her lack of real knowledge. Harper knew she should claim ignorance, should admit that she was out of her depth. Instead, she heard herself answer. .790 for the standard bowl round. .895 for the match-grade ammunition you're using. The range fell silent. Jake's team exchanged glances, their casual confidence evaporating. Those weren't numbers you picked up from treating gunshot wounds. Those were numbers you memorized through years of precision shooting. Jake's expression had gone completely cold. Where did you learn that? Harper felt the moment crystallizing around her. She could lie, could claim she had read it somewhere or heard it in conversation. Or she could tell the truth and watch everything change. Before she could answer, the radio crackled to life with an urgency that cut through the tension like a knife. All stations, all stations. This is Control. Real-world casualty event. Patrol has taken sniper fire. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Sniper still active at estimated. Range of 1,300 meters. Medevac cannot approach until threat is neutralized. How copy? The atmosphere changed instantly. This wasn't training anymore. Somewhere out there, soldiers were bleeding, pinned down by enemy fire. And the only weapon on base, capable of engaging a target at 1,300 meters, was the Barrett. Rifle sitting silent on its bipod. Jake was already moving, but Colonel Hayes' voice stopped him cold. Chief Morrison, report to TOC immediately. Doc McKenna, you with him. As they rushed toward the Tactical Operations Center, Harper felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. The old self was stirring, responding to the crisis. With instincts honed through years of combat. The part of her that had once made impossible shots under impossible conditions. Jake glanced at her as they ran. Whatever you're hiding, Doc, we're about to find out if it matters when lives are really on the line. Harper said nothing, but her hand unconsciously checked the specialized medical wrap around her wrist, the one that concealed scars from an old injury. From a different life when her hands had been steadied not by medical training, but by the absolute focus required to place bullets precisely where they needed to go. The breaking point had arrived, and there would be no hiding anymore. The Tactical Operations Center was controlled chaos when Harper and Jake arrived. Radio chatter filled the air as personnel coordinated with the pin patrol, their voices tight with professional calm that barely concealed the underlying urgency. Colonel Hayes looked up as they entered, his weathered face grim. Situation report. Alpha Company's patrol encountered a sniper while conducting reconnaissance near the northern perimeter. 2 casualties, one with a shoulder wound, manageable. The other took a round through the upper thigh, arterial involvement suspected. Harper's medical training immediately engaged. Femoral artery damage meant the wounded soldier had minutes, not hours. Every second spent pinned down was bringing him closer to bleeding out. Sniper's position is confirmed at 1,300 and 40 meters from the nearest covered approach, Hayes continued. Elevated position with clear fields of fire. Our people are effectively trapped until that threat is neutralized. Jake stepped forward. Sir, my team can. Your team's Barrett is the only 50 cal available, Hayes interrupted. And it's already zeroed from this morning's training. His eyes moved to Harper. The question is, who can make the shot? The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's confusion was evident. Why would the colonel even consider anyone other than a SEAL sniper for this mission? Sir, Jake said carefully, with respect, I'm the most qualified marksman available. My team has been training on that weapon system all morning. Hayes nodded slowly. Chief Morrison, your qualifications are noted. But making this shot under these conditions, with lives hanging in the balance. He turned to Harper. Doc, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Harper felt the moment stretching before her like a crossroads. Everything she had built over the past 3 years, her new identity, her escape from the person she used to be, was about to crumble. Sir, she said quietly, before you became a medic, what was your military occupation specialty? The question hit the room like a physical force. Jake's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring radio traffic, turned to stare at Harper with growing recognition. Harper looked at the tactical display showing the ping patrol's position. 1,340 meters. One shot to clear the way for medical evacuation. One chance to save lives with skills she had tried to leave behind. 11 Bravo, she said quietly. 75th Ranger Regiment. Designated marksman. The admission seemed to suck the air out of the room. Jake's face went through a series of expressions, disbelief, shock, and something approaching horror as he realized how completely he had misjudged her. Designated marksman, he repeated weakly. Among other things, Harper said, her voice steady, despite the emotional earthquake happening inside her. Before medical school, I was Sergeant First Class Harper McKenna, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. 47 confirmed kills. Longest recorded engagement at 1,620 meters with a Barrett Mate 201. Hayes nodded as if confirming something he already knew. And why did you leave that career path? Harper's hand moved unconsciously to her wrist, to the scars hidden beneath the medical wrap. Personal reasons, sir. I decided that saving lives was more important than taking them. But you can still make the shot. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything Harper had tried to leave behind. Making the shot meant acknowledging that part of herself again, meant admitting that some skills never truly disappeared. Sir, she said finally, there are soldiers bleeding out there. If I can help them, then yes, I can make the shot. Jake found his voice. Wait, just wait. You're telling me that our combat medic is actually a Ranger sniper? That she's been... He stopped, his face reddening. As the implication sank in, you've been listening to me lecture you about marksmanship for months, watching me demonstrate techniques, letting me treat you like you didn't understand. Chief Morrison, Harper said quietly, I never claimed to be ignorant about firearms. You made assumptions. The radio crackled with an update from the trapped patrol. Control, this is Alpha 7. Critical casualty is losing consciousness. Estimated blood loss approaching 50%. We need immediate intervention. Hayes looked between Harper and Jake. Doc, I can't order you to take this shot. You're technically a non-combatant under the Geneva Convention. But I'm the only one here who's made this shot before, Harper finished. She looked at Jake, seeing him truly for the first time in months. Chief Morrison, I'll need a spotter who knows the weapon system. Jake swallowed hard, his worldview restructuring itself in real time. Yes, I'll spot for you. Negative, Harper said, surprising everyone. Rodriguez spots. He's qualified, and I trust his win calls. She turned to Jake. I need you to coordinate the security element and prepare for medevac once the threat is neutralized. It was a test of character, and everyone in the room knew it. Harper was giving Jake a chance to be part of the solution instead of continuing. To be part of the problem. Jake straightened. Roger that. I'll coordinate ground elements and ensure medevac has a clear approach. Outstanding, Hayes said. You have 15 minutes to get into position. Doc McKenna ... T paused. Good hunting. Who hunting? As they rushed to gather equipment, Rodriguez pulled Harper aside. His expression was complex, respect, concern, and something that might have been sadness. Sergeant McKenna, he said quietly, using her old rank. You sure about this? Going back to that world? Harper checked her medical kit, ensuring she had everything needed for trauma surgery under field conditions. Rodriguez, there's a soldier bleeding out because someone with a rifle has him pinned down. I can remove that threat and then provide medical care. It's not about going back. It's about using every skill I have to preserve life. And if you miss? Harper's smile was cold and professional. Then I just fire and shoot again. The Barrett holds 5 rounds for a reason. As they moved toward the vehicles, Jake approached her. His usual swagger was completely absent, replaced by something that might have been humility. Harper, I owe you more than an apology. Save it for later, Chief, Harper interrupted, but not unkindly. Right now, let's focus on bringing our people home. The convoy raced across the desert, kicking up dust clouds that marked their passage. Harper used the time to slip back into the mindset she had worked so hard to leave behind. The calculations came easily: wind, speed, distance, atmospheric conditions. Her hands moved automatically, checking equipment with the kind of muscle memory that never truly faded. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't taking a life to complete a mission. She was taking a shot to save lives, to clear the path for healing. The distinction mattered more than she could express. As they approached the final cover position, Harper could see the wadi where the patrol was trapped. Through binoculars, the situation was clear. 2 soldiers down. The rest providing what cover they could, while pinned by accurate fire from an elevated position. 1,340 meters, Rodriguez confirmed, ranging the sniper's position. Wind gusting 8 to 12 knots from the southwest. Harper was already building her shooting position, setting up the Barrett with mechanical precision. But as she settled behind the rifle, she felt something she hadn't expected: peace. For the first time in 3 years, both sides of herself were working toward the same goal. The crosshairs settled on the distant ridge, where mathematics and training told her the enemy sniper had to be. 1 shot to save 2 lives. 1 moment to prove that a warrior's precision could serve a healer's purpose. Harper McKenna, combat medic and former ranger marksman, prepared to let the Barrett find its voice. Harper settled behind the Barrett, with movements so natural they seemed choreographed. Every motion was economical, precise, born from thousands of repetitions during a different life. The massive rifle felt familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Range confirmed at 1,340 meters, Rodriguez reported from beside her, his voice professional but carrying an undertone of respect that hadn't been there before. Wind full value at 10 knots, gusting to 15. Density altitude approximately 3,000 feet. Harper's hands moved across the rifle's controls with practiced efficiency. She adjusted the scope's parallax for the distance, checked the elevation turrets, and noted the wind flags positioned at intervals down the range. Through her scope, the enemy position was a collection of rocks and shadows on a distant ridge. "Talk to me about the casualties," she said quietly, her eye never leaving the scope. Jake's voice came through her radio earpiece. "Critical casualty is Specialist Torres. Through and through to the upper thigh. Suspected femoral involvement. He's been down for 18 minutes. The other casualty, Sergeant Kim, has a shoulder wound, but is still providing security." 18. minutes with potential arterial damage. Harper's medical training calculated the blood loss, the declining pressure, the narrowing window for surgical intervention. Every second mattered. Movement on the ridge, Rodriguez reported suddenly. Approximately 200 meters left of your current point of aim. Harper tracked left slowly, searching for the source of the movement. Enemy snipers were patient, disciplined, but they had to expose themselves eventually to maintain effective fire on the pin patrol. Through her scope, she caught a glint of reflected light. Scope glass, approximately where the geometry of the previous shots suggested the sniper had to be. The target was barely visible, just a shadow within shadows, but it was in the right position. Possible target, Harper reported. Can't confirm. Positive identification. Patrol reports movement in the rocks. Jake's voice crackled through the radio. Sniper is repositioning for another shot. The tactical situation was clear. The enemy sniper was moving to get a better angle on the trapped soldiers. In moments, he would be in position to finish what he had started. Torres didn't have time for positive identification protocols. Harper made her decision based on available intelligence and tactical necessity. Sometimes, in combat, certainty was a luxury you couldn't afford. I have a shot, she announced. Rodriguez. Read the wind conditions one final time. Wind holding steady at 12 knots, full value. Send it. Harper went through her breathing cycle, settling into the natural respiratory pause that all precision shooters learn to find. The world narrowed to the crosshairs, the distant target, and the mathematical certainty of bullet trajectory across 1,300 meters of hostile terrain. The trigger broke cleanly, and the Barrett spoke with authority that echoed across the desert like thunder. The massive rifle pushed back into Harper's shoulder, but she rode the recoil perfectly, keeping the scope on target to observe the shot's impact. For nearly 2 seconds, the bullet traveled its arc across the desert. Harper tracked its path through her scope, watching for the impact that would tell her whether her calculations had been correct. The shot struck the rocks exactly where she had aimed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then movement, a figure rolling. Out from behind cover, rifle falling away. The enemy sniper had been hit by rock fragments and spall from Harper's shot. Wounded, but not killed. Effect on target, Rodriguez confirmed. Sniper is down, appears wounded. No return fire. Jake, move the medevac now, Harper commanded, already safing the Barrett and reaching for her medical pack. I'm switching to medical mode. The transition was seamless. One moment she was a precision marksman engaging a distant threat. The next, she was a combat medic focused entirely on saving lives. The helicopter appeared over the ridge within minutes, its rotors beating the air as it swept toward the trap patrol. Harper was already moving, sprinting across open ground that minutes before had been swept by enemy fire. Her medical pack bounced against her back as she covered the 400 meters to the wadi in under 2 minutes. The scene that greeted her was every medic's nightmare. Specialist Torres lay unconscious, his uniform dark with blood. The tourniquet applied by his teammates had slowed the bleeding, but not stopped it entirely. Sergeant Kim sat against a rock, holding pressure on his shoulder wound while maintaining security with his rifle. Get me access above the tourniquet, Harper ordered, dropping to her knees beside Torres. Her hands were already moving, pulling out surgical instruments and hemostatic agents. Rodriguez, hold pressure here. Jake, I need 2 units of blood. From the helicopter now. What followed was controlled medical chaos. Harper performed procedures that most medics wouldn't attempt outside a hospital, cutting down to the damaged femoral artery, clamping bleeding vessels, packing the wound with hemostatic gauze. Her hands moved with the same precision she had shown behind the rifle, each action calculated and deliberate. Vitals stabilizing, she announced after 5 minutes of intense work. He's gonna make it, but he needs surgical intervention within the hour. As the casualties were loaded onto the helicopter, Jake approached Harper. She was covered in blood, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, but her eyes were calm. Double quotes. Harper, Jake said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotors. That shot, and then this medical work. I'd never seen anything like it. Harper wiped blood from her hands with a medical wipe. You've never seen it because most people choose one skill set or the other. But sometimes you need both. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Torres and Kim to definitive medical care. The enemy sniper, also wounded but stable, was in custody. 2 lives saved, a threat neutralized, all because someone had refused to be limited by conventional role. Definitions dot as they rode back to base. Harper stared out at the desert landscape, processing what had just happened. For 3 years, she had tried to leave her past behind, to become someone whose hands healed instead of killed. Today had proven that the old skills were still there, waiting beneath the surface. But it had also proven something else, that there didn't have to be a conflict between the 2 sides of herself. The shot she had taken wasn't about killing. It was about creating the space for healing to occur. The medical procedures that followed weren't separate from the marksmanship. They were part of the same mission to preserve life. Jake sat across from her in the vehicle, studying her with new understanding. Harper, I need to ask you something. Why didn't you tell us? Why let me make an ass of myself for months when you could have shut me up with 1 sentence? Harper considered the question. Because I didn't want to be defined by what I used to do. I became a medic because I decided that saving lives was more important than taking them. Today was the first time those 2 missions aligned. But the skills never went away. No, Harper admitted. They never went away. That evening, word of what had happened spread through the base like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. The quiet combat medic who had made an impossible shot and then performed battlefield surgery that saved 2 lives. By dinner time, personnel who had barely noticed Harper before were approaching her with new respect, but it was the formal debrief that truly changed everything. Colonel Hayes called the meeting for 1900 hours in the main briefing room. When Harper arrived, she found not just the usual participants, but representatives from multiple units across the base. Word had reached higher command, and everyone wanted to understand what had happened. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes began. Today's events have highlighted something important about the nature of modern warfare and the artificial boundaries we sometimes create between different military specialties. He gestured to Harper, who sat in the front row still wearing her blood-stained uniform. Sergeant First Class McKenna demonstrated something remarkable today, the ability to seamlessly transition between combat and medical roles, based on tactical necessity. Jake Morrison sat several rows back, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something approaching humility. His team surrounded him, but the dynamic had shifted. They were no longer looking at him for leadership. They were studying Harper with obvious respect. The shot that neutralized the enemy sniper was made at 1,340 meters under combat conditions, Hayes continued. The subsequent medical intervention saved Specialist Torres's life. Both actions were performed by the same individual, using skills that our current military structure typically treats as mutually exclusive. Major Williams from the Medical Corps raised his hand. Sir, are we talking about cross-training medics in advanced marksmanship? The Geneva Convention implications alone. We're talking about reality, Hayes interrupted. The reality that modern combat doesn't respect our organizational charts. McKenna proved today that the most effective warriors might be those who can save lives and take them with equal skill. The room erupted in discussion. Some officers were excited by the possibilities, others concerned about doctrine and legal implications. Through it all, Harper sat quietly, feeling the weight of attention she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. Finally, Hayes called for quiet. "Doc McKenna, would you care to explain your perspective on today's events?" Harper stood slowly, acutely aware that every eye in the room was focused on her. For 3 years, she had hidden in plain sight, content to be overlooked and underestimated. Now, there was no hiding. 3 years ago, she began, I was a different person. I was very good at my job, which was finding targets at extreme range and eliminating them with precision. I took pride in that skill, in being among the best at something that required absolute dedication. She paused, her eyes finding Jake's across the room. But being the best marksman in the world doesn't matter if you can't save the person bleeding next to you. I learned that lesson the hard way, and it changed everything. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Today wasn't about choosing between being a shooter or a medic. It was about using every skill I possessed to preserve life. The shot I took cleared the path for medical intervention. The medical procedures that followed were part of the same mission, bringing our people home alive. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of officers who had previously dismissed her as just another support soldier. The enemy doesn't care about our job classifications. They don't respect the boundaries between combat and medical roles. If we're going to be effective, we need personnel who can adapt, who can transition between roles based on tactical necessity. Major Williams spoke up again. But the legal implications are manageable, Harper interrupted. A medic providing defensive fire to protect casualties isn't a violation of the Geneva Convention. Neither is eliminating a threat that prevents medical evacuation. The law recognizes the reality of combat in ways that our doctrine sometimes doesn't. After the briefing, Jake approached Harper in the hallway outside. His team followed at a respectful distance, their earlier swagger completely absent. "Harper," Jake said, his voice carrying a sincerity that hadn't been there before. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation." Harper waited, curious to hear what he would say. "For months, I've been treating you like you were somehow less capable, less experienced, less worthy of respect. I told myself it was about maintaining standards, about recognizing real combat experience." He shook his head. "But the truth is, I was threatened by you." "Threatened?" Harper asked. "You never tried to prove anything. Never bragged about your experience or demanded recognition. You just did your job, quietly, competently, without needing anyone to acknowledge how good you were." Jake's expression was pained. That kind of confidence, that security in your own abilities, it made me realize how insecure I was about mine. Harper studied his face, seeing genuine remorse and self-awareness. "Jake, confidence isn't about making others feel small. Today, you coordinated the ground element perfectly, managed the medevac, did your job when it mattered. That's what counts. But I spent months. You spent months learning something important," Harper said. "That assumptions are dangerous. And that real strength doesn't need to prove itself by diminishing others." Jake nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Between us, between my team and the medical corps?" Harper considered the question. "Now we figure out how to work together. How to integrate capabilities instead of maintaining artificial barriers. Your team has skills mine needs, and vice versa. You'd be willing to train us after everything." "Jake, there are soldiers out there who need both skill sets to survive. If I can help prepare your team for that reality, then that's what I'll do." Rodriguez, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "Sergeant McKenna, can I ask you something? Why hide your background? Why not just tell people from the beginning?" Harper was quiet for a long moment. "Because I didn't want to be defined by what I used to do. I became a medic because I believed healing was more important than hurting. Today taught me that sometimes they're the same thing." The next morning brought changes that rippled through the entire base structure. Colonel Hayes had worked through the night, coordinating with higher command to formalize what everyone now understood, that the artificial separation between combat and medical roles was a luxury they could no longer afford. Harper found herself in the unusual position of being requested by multiple units for training. Jake's SEAL team was first in line, but representatives from infantry, armor, and even aviation units were asking for integrated medical and tactical instruction. The training area became a fusion of medical stations and shooting positions, with Harper designing scenarios that required seamless transitions between roles. She started with basic principles, teaching Jake's team that understanding the human body as a system meant understanding both how to repair it and how to stop threats against it. The human body, Harper explained during one session, using an anatomical chart beside a ballistic gel torso, responds to trauma in predictable ways. When you understand those responses, you understand both how to treat injuries and how to prevent them from becoming fatal. She pointed to specific areas on the chart. A medic sees the subclavian artery, the risk of pneumothorax, the nerve pathways. A marksman sees center mass. The best operators see both. Jake, who had initially resisted spending time on medical training, was beginning to understand the interconnections. Doc, yesterday when you made that shot with the Barrett, you transitioned to medical mode in seconds. How do you switch mentally from that kind of precision shooting to life-saving procedures? Harper considered her answer carefully. You don't switch. That's the misconception. When I looked through that scope, I wasn't thinking about elimination. I was thinking about the soldier bleeding in that wadi, about the medic who couldn't reach him, about the lives that would be lost if I didn't act. She picked up the Barrett they were using for training, handling it with the same care she showed her medical equipment. This rifle can reach across more than a mile and change a situation instantly. In the wrong hands, it's destruction. In the right hands, it can create the space needed for healing to work. Stevens, one of Jake's younger team members, raised his hand. Sergeant McKenna, how do you deal with the mental transition, going from taking a life to saving one? The question hit deeper than Harper expected. It was something she had struggled with during her own transition years earlier. The psychological weight of changing from someone who killed to someone who healed. That's the wrong framework, she said finally. I wasn't taking a life yesterday. I was removing a threat that was preventing medical intervention. The shot and the surgery that followed were part of the same mission, bringing our people home. The training progressed beyond theory. Harper designed complex scenarios where the operators had to make split-second decisions about engaging threats versus providing medical care. She taught them that sometimes the best medicine was superior firepower, and sometimes the best tactics involved keeping everyone alive. Mason, another team member, struggled with a scenario where he had to choose between pursuing a fleeing enemy and treating a wounded teammate. Sergeant McKenna, in this situation, what's the right call? There isn't always a right call, Harper replied. There are only consequences you can live with. The question isn't what's tactically perfect. It's what serves the larger mission of preserving life. Rodriguez, who had been assisting with the training, pulled Harper aside during a break. Sergeant, watching you these past few days, it's like seeing someone become whole again. You spent 3 years hiding half of who you are. Harper watched Jake's team practice transitioning between medical procedures and defensive positions. I wasn't hiding, Rodriguez. I was trying to become someone new. But maybe integration is better than transformation. What do you mean? I spent 3 years thinking I had to choose between being a warrior or a healer. Yesterday proved that. The best version of myself might be both. On the final day of initial training, Harper set up the ultimate test, a complex scenario involving multiple casualties and active threats at various ranges. Jake's team would have to work together, with role shifting based on the evolving situation. The scenario unfolded with Harper observing from an overwatch position. Jake took tactical command while his team members seamlessly transitioned between security and medical roles. When they encountered critical casualties, some operators provided medical intervention while others maintained security. The culmination came when Jake himself, faced with a long-range threat and a critical casualty, made the call Harper had been waiting for. McKenna, I need you on the Barrett. Mason, take over medical. Rodriguez, spot for her. Harper felt a surge of pride as she moved to the rifle. The integration was complete. Jake understood that rigid role definitions were luxuries they couldn't afford when lives were at stake. She settled behind the Barrett, finding her natural shooting position. The massive rifle felt like an extension of herself, a tool perfectly suited for its purpose. Target identified, 1,500 meters, Rodriguez called out. Wind full value at 12 knots, gusting to 15. Harper made her calculations. Automatically, the mathematics flowing as naturally as medical dosages. The Barrett spoke once, its voice carrying across the training area with finality. Hit, Rodriguez confirmed. Target down. Simulation complete, Jake announced. Outstanding work, everyone. But the real victory wasn't in the simulated shot. It was in the understanding that had developed between formerly separate communities. Jake's team now understood that medical skills weren't secondary to combat effectiveness. They were integral to it. And Harper had learned that her shooting skills weren't something to be ashamed of, but tools to be used wisely in service of her larger mission. That evening, Jake approached Harper with a package. Inside was a custom challenge coin from his team. On one side was the SEAL Trident. On the other was a combat medic badge superimposed over a rifle scope with the word Healer engraved below. We had it made special, Jake said. Figured if we're going to learn from the best, we should acknowledge what makes you unique. Harper turned the coin over in her hands, feeling its weight. What makes me unique isn't the combination of skills, Jake. It's understanding when to use which one. We understand that now, Jake replied. And Harper? Thank you. Not just for the training, but for showing us what real integration looks like. 6 months later, Harper stood before a classroom filled with military personnel from across multiple branches. The integration training program she had developed had become mandatory for all special operations medical personnel, and interest was spreading to conventional units as well. The Barrett rifle sat in the corner of the classroom, no longer a symbol of division between combat and medical roles, but a tool that represented the evolution of military medicine. Beside it sat a fully equipped trauma kit, both instruments equally important in the modern battlefield environment. The traditional model, Harper told her students, treated combat and medical skills as separate specialties. You were either a shooter or a healer, a warrior or a medic. But modern warfare doesn't respect those boundaries. In the front row, Jake Morrison sat with his team, now serving as assistant instructors in the program. The transformation in their understanding had been complete. They now taught incoming students that medical skills were combat multipliers, not secondary considerations. Today's battlefield, Harper continued, requires personnel who can adapt to changing situations. A medic who can't defend themselves or their patients is of limited use. A shooter who can't provide basic trauma care might watch teammates die from preventable injuries. She gestured to the equipment in the corner. These tools serve the same ultimate purpose, preserving life. The rifle clears the path for medical intervention. The medical kit saves lives once the path is clear. Understanding both makes you more effective at your primary mission. After the class, Harper found herself back on the range where everything had changed. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The Barrett sat on its bipod, waiting for the next student to discover that precision shooting was about more than hitting targets. Colonel Hayes joined her, watching the evening training session where new students practiced transitioning between medical and tactical roles. Remarkable changes, Hayes observed. Casualty rates among units that have gone through your program are down 30%. Mission effectiveness is up across all metrics. Harper nodded, watching a young medic successfully engage a long-range target before transitioning to treat a simulated casualty. They're learning that there doesn't have to be a conflict between different skill sets. That integration makes you more effective, not less focused. Any regrets? Hayes asked. About coming out of the shadows, so to speak? Harper considered the question. For 3 years, she had hidden her past, content to be underestimated and overlooked. Now she was in the spotlight, her story known throughout the military medical community. No regrets, she said finally. I spent too long thinking I had to choose between who I was and who I wanted to become. Turns out, the best version of myself includes both. Jake approached them, having finished supervising the evening training. His transformation had been as dramatic as anyone's, from someone who dismissed medical personnel to someone who understood that healing and protection were part of the same mission. Harper, he said, just got word from higher command. They want to expand the program to all combat arms branches. You've started something bigger than just medical training. Harper smiled, thinking about all the young soldiers who would benefit from understanding that strength came in many forms. Good. Maybe we can finally put an end to the idea that warriors and healers are different species. As the training session ended and students secured their equipment, Harper reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The Barrett rifle had found its voice in her hands, but more importantly, she had found her own voice. One that spoke for integration over division, for understanding over assumptions. The desert wind carried the sounds of soldiers learning, growing, becoming more than they thought possible. In classrooms and on ranges across the military, Harper's lesson was spreading, that true strength lay not in the weapon you carried or the medical knowledge you possessed, but in the wisdom to know when each was needed. Jake secured the Barrett, handling it now with the same respect Harper showed her medical equipment. You know what the best part is? He said. These kids will never make the mistakes we made. They'll understand from the beginning that there's no shame in being good at everything your mission requires. Harper packed her medical kit, each piece of equipment finding its designated place through years of repetition. That's the goal. To create a generation of soldiers who measure their worth not by what they can destroy, but by what they can preserve. As they walked back toward the base, the Barrett secured for another day of training, Harper felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since leaving the ranges. She had found a way to honor both sides of herself, the precision marksman who could place bullets exactly where they needed to go, and the healer who understood that sometimes the most important target was the one that cleared the path for medicine to work. The story of the combat medic who could shoot had become legend, but the real victory was quieter and more profound. It was in the understanding that had grown between formerly separate communities, in the recognition that artificial barriers often prevented people from reaching their full potential. Harper McKenna had shown them that a healer's hands could steady a rifle when lives hung in the balance, and that a warrior's precision could guide medical instruments when bullets alone couldn't bring peace. She had proven that the ancient divide between those who took lives and those who saved them was an illusion, shattered by the complex realities of modern warfare. In her wake, she left a new generation of soldiers who understood that true effectiveness came not from specialization, but from integration, who measured victory not in enemies defeated, but in lives preserved. And who knew that sometimes the most powerful shot was the one that created space for healing hands to do their work? The Barrett had found its voice, and in doing so, had taught everyone who heard it that weapons and medicine, properly understood, served the same sacred purpose: the preservation of life in a world too often defined by its ending. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Have you ever encountered someone who completely surprised you with hidden talents? Share your own stories of people who defied expectations in the comments. Your experiences help build this incredible community of storytellers who understand that real strength comes in many forms.